Today we're going to talk about shopping center. And I think it's worth repeating some of the information on the form. Just like a refresher. The first page is usually about the same. There might be variation from one form to another, but in terms of premises, it's about the same. Usually you have the street address that you have to input, city name, county name, and the zip code, okay? And whatever other documents that you use to describe the premises, such as something that is displayed on an exhibit. That exhibit is attached to describe the premises. Sometimes just to make it more clear and certain exactly what square footage or what area is being leased. Okay, and then you have the general description that tells you the nature of the premises. And this is a shopping center lease. A shopping center lease. This is standard, early possession, base rent. This is something you guys have not seen before until now. This is the first time among all the different forms that we've seen that has percentage rent rate here. The percentage rent rate is basically a certain percentage of the gross sale, whatever the percentage is. It says your percentage rent shall be due and payable in accordance with the provisions of the percentage rent addendum, if any, attached hereto and made a part hereof, and paragraph 4 hereof. So there's actually an addendum known as the percentage rent addendum, which if we have time we'll look at it, but it's just a separate form that is used in conjunction with this multi-tenant shopping center net lease. Okay. Lessee's share of common area operating expense. Again, this is a CAM charge, common area operating expense. Instead of calling it common area maintenance, they call it a common area operating expense. Like in a shopping mall, if you represent a tenant of a rental unit in this big mall, they may have percentage rent being part of the lease, so you may need to know what the percentage rent is. And then here it tells you this percentage rent rate is actually in addition. This 1.6 and 1.7 as well as 1.8, all three items are in addition to the base rent because it is a net lease. You can see it's a net lease. So 1.6, 1.7, and 1.8 are in addition to the base rent that the tenant is paying. So you got the percentage rent, and then you got the common area operating expense. And then they also have such a thing, although it's not always applicable, known as the Merchants Association annual dues. Lessee shall pay Merchants Association dues and or become a member of the Merchants Association in accordance with the provisions of the Merchants Association addendum. There's also a separate form if there is a Merchants Association within the shopping mall. And 1.9 is similar as before. It talks about the initial payment. Initially, you always have the base rent that you're paying. It could be because you're coming in the middle of the month, so it could be just some partial rent, plus maybe the first month as well as the second month's rent. Okay. Usually, it is just the partial plus the first month's rent. Common area operating expenses, usually on the first payment check, you will include the common area operating expenses for certain use period. And you also have the security deposit any applicable merchants association dues. All of these are added and become total due upon execution of this lease. This is the total of what's above. Okay? Got that? Oh, good. All right. Next, 1.13, that's the same as before, so we're not going to cover it. Guarantor is the same as before. And then the attachment, you got the addendum site plan. If you have any applicable site plan that depict the premises, as well as the shopping center, okay? And then you have the rules and regulations of the shopping center, if applicable, you will check it. And the design criteria for the shopping center, if applicable, you'll check it. And any work letter, if you don't know what a work letter is, it's just an agreement regarding certain construction work or remodeling work that the landlord is doing to get the premises ready. We call that the work letter. Premises, it's the same as before, so we'll skip it. Vehicle parking is the same as before. Common area definitions.
I cooked that just for you, okay? Give me the, hear me?
Who's that? Who is getting mad at somebody? Jenny 啊，冇咁大聲啊，好冇？
I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Common areas. Let's define all areas and facilities outside the premises and within the exterior boundary line of the shopping center. That is the very common definition of common areas. I think it's the same in most AIR standard leases for definition of a common area. Okay. And common area changes. Let's talk about that one. It says, lessor shall have the right in lessor's sole discretion from time to time to make changes or additions to common areas. I think this is quite a common provision in this standard leases for industrial or commercial, where the landlord has a right to make changes to the common area. The tenant usually do not have any ability to object to any changes that the landlord makes. So if they want to make certain changes regarding the driveways, entrances, parking spaces, they have the right to do that. Okay? That is something that they always have the right to do. One thing that is different between shopping centers, net lease, and other net leases, they have this provision on common area promotional events and sidewalk sales. This one says, lessor reserves the right from time to time in lessor's sole discretion to utilize portions of the common areas for promotional events, which may include but shall not be limited to entertainment. So they could, say for example, if you're in Southern California, you're like in Diamond Plaza, so they could hold some promotional events to promote Diamond Plaza. That's something that they have the right to do, such as sidewalk sales as well. And then it says, lessor further reserves the right in lessor's discretion to permit any one or more tenants of the shopping center to conduct the display and or sale of merchandise from the sidewalks immediately adjacent to such tenants' respective premises. That means if any particular tenant wants to use part of the sidewalk to promote its product, and if it's with the permission of the landlord has the right to allow these things to happen. So if you're not happy about your neighbor doing that, you're not you don't have the ability to prevent it because the landlord actually has the discretion to allow it. It also gives the landlord the right to remodel the common area. Okay. For example, it says, at any time during the term, lessor may remodel or expand in any manner the existing shopping center, which shall include without limitation the addition of shops and or new buildings to the shopping center, collectively remodeled center. If lessor deems it necessary for construction personnel to enter the premises in order to construct the remodel center, lessor shall give lessee no less than 60 days prior notice, and lessee shall allow such entry. So once in a while, if the landlord wants to remodel the shopping center, and if it involves certain units, they have the right to give notice to the tenant that they want to come in and do some work, okay, to remodel the shopping center. And you have the obligation to comply with their request, okay. Term, early possession, we covered those before. Now let's look at the definition of common area operating expenses. You see me repeat a lot on the definition of common area operating expenses because it is very important that you know what's included and what's not included. Oftentimes disputes arise between landlords and tenants because the tenants don't understand what's included and what's not included in the common area operating expense. So if the tenant understands, maybe there will be less disputes in this area. Therefore, it is very important for you to understand what's included and what's not included in the common area operating expense. Let's review once again. Okay, there appears to be I think there are 10 items. Okay, in the common area operating expense. Item 1, the operation, repair, maintenance in neat, clean, good order and condition, and replacement as reasonably necessary of the following. And basically, the common area and common area improvements, roof, blah, blah, blah. We've gone through those before. Exterior signs and any tenant directories, any fire detection and or sprinkler systems, common electrical, plumbing, and other utilities. All other areas and improvements that are within the exterior boundaries of the project but outside the premises and the space occupied by the tenant. Nothing new, we covered this before. The second one is the cost of water, gas, electricity, and telephone to service the common area. That also occurs in previous types of leases. Cost of trash disposal, pest control, property management, security service. Make sure you I don't know, maybe this is a different Nicole. I see Nicole Wang and then I see Nicole. Who's Nicole? Okay, anyway. And then you have this reserve, that's also an item for the common area operating expense. And for net leases, real property taxes that are paid by the lessor is also an item within the common area operating expense. And the cost of the premiums for the insurance are maintained by lessor. Because it is a net lease and the insurance is passed to the tenant, therefore the cost of the premium for the insurance concerning the common area is an item in the common area operating expense. Deductible for insured loss within the common area, of course, that's always an item of the common area operating expense. Auditors, accountants, and attorneys' fees associated with the operation of the shopping center, that is also an item that is included in the common area operating expense. The cost of any capital improvement to the building or the shopping center not covered under the provisions of 2.3. If they make certain improvement to the property, such capital improvement may be part of the operating expense. Okay, and then the cost of any other services to be provided by the lessor that are stated elsewhere in the lease to be a common area operating expense. So this is the definition. It is really no different than all the other net leases that we have seen. It's the same definition for common area operating expense. And there is something that this one may be unique to the other type of leases. It's the definition of major tenant. Usually in a shopping center, there's usually a major tenant. And the definition of major tenant is a tenant leasing at least 15,000 square feet of rentable area within the shopping center. So, for example, if you're like in a big shopping center, you could have a major tenant there. But 15,000 seems to be a very big area. Okay. Why do we need to know who the major tenant is? Because being a major tenant has its advantages in a shopping center. And it's on item number E. It says here if there are one or more major tenants, as hereinafter defined within the shopping center, then at the lessor's sole option, the amount to be reimbursed by such major tenants to lessor for all or a portion of the common area operating expenses may be determined by alternative equitable methods. Example, a major tenant may pay directly for its own security. So sometimes when you're in a shopping center that has a major tenant, the way that it works is that the major tenant actually may pay certain expenses directly for the common area. For example, it says here a major tenant may pay directly for its own security, okay? And the actual amount paid by such major tenant shall be credited against the common area operating expenses allocated to other tenants of the shopping center, provided, however, that in such event, the rentable area of the buildings based on lease to such major tenants shall be excluded from the rentable area of the shopping center for purposes of determining lessee's share of common area operating expense for those specific items. Say, for example, you have a major tenant who pays for its own security, or who may be paying for its own expenses, may pay on its own directly. Then, in terms of computing your contribution, if you are a smaller tenant, for your common area operating expense based on the total square footage, the total square footage of the major tenant would not be part of the equation because they already paid the expenses directly. So if you don't understand this, you might be talking to the landlord saying, how come Sears is not contributing to the common area operating expense? It could be that Sears is already directly paying for such expenses. And if Sears is already doing that, then whatever expenses that you pay that appears on the bill that you receive from the landlord, they will not include those direct expenses that Sears has already paid. So it might look like your percentage is high because Sears is not contributing. And the reason why Sears is not contributing is because Sears has already paid its own expense. Okay? So that's something for you to know. Now let's look at this one. Agreed trade name. Okay. Now, it says here, lessee shall use and occupy the premises only for the agreed use and for no other purpose. And lessee shall operate at the premises only under the agreed trade name and under no other trade name. Agreed trade name is actually defined in the lease somewhere. Although I don't know where it's defined, might be on the front page, but it is defined somewhere on the lease. Now, so you can only use that agreed trade name if you operate within this shopping center, you cannot use any other trade name. Right here, 1.11. So 1.11 is where you insert the agreed trade name. If you plan to use a certain trade name within the shopping center, then you can only use that trade name only. You know, for example, you want to use a certain trade name for your fashion store, you know, okay? And you can only use that trade name. Okay? All right. We talked about environmental substances already, so I will not cover it. It's the same thing as what we had before. Maintenance also, we talked about that, as well as utility installations, trade fixtures, and alterations. Ownership, removal, surrender, and restoration is the same provision, same as the other form. And then on liability insurance and indemnity, it's the same thing. Okay. Damage or destruction, we covered that before, so we'll not cover it again. Same thing with, actually, I will cover real property taxes. Let's look at payment of taxes. It says here, except as otherwise provided in paragraph 10.3, lessor shall pay the real property taxes applicable to the shopping center, and said payment shall be included in the calculation of common area or operating expense. And again, because this is a net lease, all real property taxes are ultimately paid by the tenants. So initially, the landlord will pay all the real property taxes, and then the real property taxes that are paid by the landlord will be included in the calculation of the common area operating expense. And from there, each tenant's contribution of the common area operating expense is based on its square footage relative to the total square footage of the shopping center. And I think we covered assignment and subletting, although I think I don't think we quite finished it the last time on assignment or subletting. Okay, so I will cover a little bit about assignment and subletting today. Assignment means a transfer of the entire lease to another person or entity. That's what assignment means. Subletting means a partial transfer of the lease to another person or entity. And let's look at the terms and conditions applicable to assignment and applicable to subletting. I don't think we covered enough on subletting. It says here, the following terms and conditions shall apply to any subletting by lessee or of all or any part of the lease premises, and shall be deemed included in subleases under this lease, whether or not expressly incorporated herein. A. Lessee hereby assigns to transfers to lessor all of lessee's interest in all rent payable on any sublease, and lessor may collect such rent and apply same toward lessee's obligations under this lease, provided, however, that until a breach shall occur in the performance of the lessee's obligations, lessee may collect said rent. All that means is that if you are a tenant, you just want to sublease a part of the premises, you will collect the rent and then pay the entire sum to the landlord. If you are a tenant subleasing your space. And then it says here on B, in the event of a breach by the lessee, lessor may at its option require sublessee to atone to lessor, in which event lessor shall undertake the obligations of the sublessor under such sublease from the time of the exercise of said option to the expiration of such sublease, provided, however, lessor shall not be liable for any prepaid rents or security deposit paid by such sublessee to such sublessor. All that means is that if you are sublease, you pay your rent to the sublessor, who is the lessee, and if the sublessor / lessee does not pay the rent to the landlord may require the sublessee to atone to the lessor. Atone means that in the event of a breach by the lessee to pay rent to the landlord, the sublessee may be required, instead of paying rent to the sublessor, to pay rent to the lessor directly. Okay, so let's say, for example, B is a tenant, C is a sublessee, and under sublease, C will be required to pay rent to B, but A is the landlord. So if B does not make the rent payment to A may require the C to atone, which means that C will be forced to pay rent to A directly and not pay rent to B. That's what atonement means. Okay, default breach remedies, we cover that. Okay. Let me see. There's probably something in here about the sublease that I need to explain to you. Now, in case you want to assign or sublease the premises, there's always this $500 that the tenant have to pay to the landlord, just to allow the landlord to consider the proposed sublease. So there is a $500 payment required. Okay, that's very common. Okay, to pay the landlord to apply to have the sublease approved or assignment approved, $500. And if you look at G, it says lessor's consent to any assignment or subletting shall not transfer to the assignee or sublessee any option granted to the original lessee by this lease unless such transfer is specifically consented to by lessor in writing. Now, if you are a tenant, you have, let's say, 2 5-year options remaining on your lease. And now you want to sell your business. You want to sell your business to a buyer. And in order for the buyer to consider buying your business, the buyer might want to know how many years of options you have left. So as a buyer, if you represent a buyer, in this case, you might want to make sure that if your buyer buys the business, your buyer will have the 2 5-year options transferred to the buyer. So in order to make sure of that, you need to make sure that you get the consent from the lessor in writing. So you prepare a written consent by the landlord to allow the current tenant to transfer the 2-year 5-year option to the buyer. If you don't do that, and you go ahead and get approval for sublease, your buyer might find out that the landlord never consented to the transfer of the 2 5-year option. And then if you're a buyer, you just took over a lease that would expire very soon without the 2 5-year options. So that's very important. Make sure you dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Certain things are more important, so I'll repeat it, but the less important ones I don't repeat. Okay. But if you don't hear me talk about them here, I'm sure if you go and look at the previous videos, I would have covered them. All right, well, I want to say something about notices, notice requirements. This is very important. It says here, all notices required or permitted by this lease or applicable law shall be in writing. They may be delivered in person, by hand, or by courier, or may be sent by regular, certified, or registered mail, or U.S. Postal Service express mail with postage prepaid. This is very, very important if the tenants have options. If the tenants have options, the tenant needs to know how to exercise the option. And the way to exercise the option is to serve notices on the landlord. Make sure that you use a method that is approved by the lease. For example, in this particular lease, because it is a standard lease, it actually allows different ways to deliver this notice. It can be by hand or by courier, or it can be by certified mail, or it can be by U.S. Postal Service express mail, one of these methods. But sometimes you might come across some attorney-drafted commercial leases that don't allow such flexibility. In fact, some of the commercial leases that I've seen, they don't allow certain methods. So just make sure that if you want to serve notice, to consult paragraph 23, okay, to decide what type of notice is permissible. And this one also actually allows a facsimile transmission, so you can do it by fax, okay. So this is actually a very flexible way to give notice. Date of notice, it says here, any notice sent by registered mail shall be given on the date of delivery shown on the receipt card. So if you send notice by certified mail with return receipt, the actual date of notice starts from the day of delivery shown on the receipt card. We talked about this, no right to hold over, cumulative, okay. Subordination, atonement, non-disturbance. I think that's one we never covered, okay. Since we didn't cover that one and I still have 10 minutes left, I'm going to cover it. Subordination, atonement, and non-disturbance. Let's talk a little bit about that. Subordination is very simple. It means that even though the lease is entered into before the landlord refinance the property, for example, sometimes a landlord might consider refinancing his current mortgage. But if there is no subordination clause in the lease, some lender might not loan to the landlord because no lenders want to be subordinate to a lease. So in order for the landlord not to have to worry about not being able to get a loan because of an existing lease, there will always be a subordination clause that the tenant has to agree to. In other words, the tenant always agrees to subordinate its lease to the rights of the lenders. Okay. Atonement. I think I talked about atonement earlier, but we can talk about it again. In the event that lessor transfer title to the premises, or the premises are required by another, upon the foreclosure or termination of a security device to which this lease is subordinated, lessee shall, subject to the non-disturbance provisions of the paragraph 30.3, attorn to such new owner, and upon request enter into a new lease containing all of the terms and provisions of this lease with such new owner for the remainder of the term hereof, or at the election of the new owner, this lease shall automatically become a new lease between lessee and such new owner, and lessor shall thereafter be relieved of any further obligations, and such new owner shall assume all of lessor's obligations, except that such new owner shall not be liable for any acts or omissions of the lessor. Now I know it's very, it's more than a mouthful, but I'll I'll explain to you in layman's terms. What that means is, if you are a tenant, your landlord has a mortgage against his property. Your landlord runs into some financial difficulties, so he's facing foreclosure. Ultimately, the property becomes foreclosed on. What happens to your lease is that whoever that buys the property through the foreclosure becomes the new owner. The atonement clause makes you a tenant to the new owner. That's what atonement means. So atonement is very common on commercial leases. This is a standard lease, but even for non-standard leases, we still see atonement. So just remember, if your landlord goes into foreclosure, once the property is sold at the auction, there'll be a new owner. By way of atonement, you become the tenant to the new owner, which means that you have to pay all your rent to the new owner due to atonement. Okay, you no longer pay rent to the old tenant. I mean, to the old landlord, sorry. To the old, because of atonement. Okay? These three always go together. If you see commercial leases, you always see subordination, atonement, and non-disturbance. They all always go together. All disturbance means is, as long as the tenant attorns, the landlord will not do anything to disturb the possession of the tenant. So you don't have to worry about the new owner doing anything to disturb your possession of the premises, okay, even if your landlord is foreclosed on, okay? That's what non-disturbance means. It says here, with respect to security devices entered into by lessor. Security devices simply means the mortgages. Entered into by the lessor after the execution of this lease. Lessee's subordination of this lease shall be subject to receiving a commercially reasonable non-disturbance agreement from the lender, which non-disturbance agreement provides that lessee's possession of the premises and this lease, including any option to extend the term hereof, will not be disturbed as long as lessee is not in breach and attorns to the record owner of the premises. Just like I said, even if the property is sold at an auction, you don't have to worry about losing possession as long as you agree to pay rent to the new owner. Okay? That's what it means. Now, better yet, and this is very important, if you are a tenant with 2 5-year options, for example, you don't have to worry about losing those options with provision like that. So if the landlord falls into foreclosure, the landlord will lose title. Whoever that takes over title would have to honor the options that you were given previously. So you will not lose your options just because your landlord is foreclosed on. Okay, provided you pay rent to the new owner. Okay, done with that. Here's an interesting one. Number 33 is his auctions. Lessee shall not conduct nor permit to be conducted any auction upon the premises without the lessor's prior written consent. So if you are closing shop, you're doing liquidation, you can't conduct any auction without the landlord's consent. That's all it means. Okay. Okay. And here he talks about signs. It says a lessor may place on the premises ordinary for sale signs at any time and ordinary for lease signs during the last 6 months of the term hereof. So as you get close to the last part of your rent, like within 6 months, at which point the landlord may have the right to put for sale or for lease sign on your premises if you have less than 6 months to go on your lease. Okay. Yeah. Okay. On a typical residential lease, you don't have such provision. In other words, I think you may have. I just don't remember how many months before the expiration. I think there may be a right for the landlord to put the for lease signs. It's probably somewhere in the car form. I can't remember what that was. Let's look at this one, number 35, termination or merger. Unless specifically stated otherwise in writing by lessor, the voluntary or other surrender of this lease by lessee in the mutual termination or cancellation hereof, or termination hereof by lessor for breach of lessee, shall automatically terminate any sublease or lesser estate in the premises. So, for example, if you're a sublessee and your sublessor decided that he wants to end his lease. If he ends his lease, so will your lease, sublease end with the termination of his lease. Okay. All right. We covered options previously, okay, but we didn't really talk about multiple options. So let's talk about multiple options. Says here, in the event that lessee has multiple options to extend or renew this lease, a later option cannot be exercised unless the prior actions have been validly exercised. So if you have 2 5-year options, you will lose the second one if you did not properly exercise the first one. Right? Common sense. Okay. You have to have exercised the first one before you can exercise the second one. That's what it means. Now, that means that if you have 2 5-year options, you have to exercise twice. By exercising it first time, you don't automatically get the second option. You still have to exercise it again before you get the second option. Okay. All right. The rest is not so important. Now, a couple of boxes here. I want to talk about it. It's always preferable to select arbitration. I used to hate arbitration, but these days I think there are some good things to arbitration. It saves time and money. I think generally speaking, it does save time and money to go to arbitration than to go to court. Okay. All right. Okay. And I think we talked about the ADA. You have to check either one of these boxes. If you have never done inspection, check the first box. If you have done inspection, check the second box. Okay. If you don't know what ADA means, it has to do with the handicap, protection of the handicap's rights. That's what ADA is about. Okay. It's actually an area of law that may be important if you are a commercial property owner, and you need to learn about. Okay, that's pretty much concludes all the training that we're going to do on